My name is Rachel, and I'm 32 years old. I never expected to face such a huge betrayal. 3 months ago, after 10 years of marriage, I lost my husband David to a sudden heart attack. Just 1 week after his funeral, my mother-in-law, Margaret, told me something that made me struggle to hold back my laughter. She claimed David had cheated on me, had a secret child with another woman, and that his will stated I needed to share the house with them. But there was something Margaret didn't know. If you're watching this from somewhere where family drama hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. David and I met 11 years ago at an art gallery opening downtown. I was working as a graphic designer, and he was a project manager at a software company. At the gallery, we were both looking at the same painting, an abstract seascape. Beautiful, he said, walking up next to me. But the real beauty is the person admiring it. It was such a sweet pickup line that I couldn't help but laugh. Our first date was the next evening at a small Italian restaurant. What I loved most about David was how he spoke, the way he thoughtfully discussed any topic, how respectfully he treated the waitstaff, how genuinely he shared his life plans. 6 months later, he proposed at the same gallery where we first met. When we bought our first home, David told me, "Rachel, this house is our future. This is where our children will run around, where we'll build our happy memories." At $600,000, this house was a big investment for us at the time, but David had just gotten a promotion and my design work was picking up. We tried for years to have children. The first 2 years we tried naturally. Then we went to doctors, had tests done, underwent treatments. We attempted IVF 3 times. Each failure wore us down a little more, but David never gave up. "We'll find a way," he'd always say. But worst case scenario, you and I are here. That's enough. Finally, doctors told us David had a serious problem. His sperm count was extremely low, and treatment options were minimal. This news devastated us, but somehow it made our marriage even stronger. We held each other closer, started traveling, picked up new hobbies. David's mother, Margaret, was a completely different person. 60 years old, controlling, critical, and never satisfied with me. Ever since David and I got married, she constantly implied David could find someone more suitable. David is such a talented man. He should be with someone who really deserves him. I'd always respond that David chose me, that we were happy, but Margaret was never convinced. Margaret's biggest issue was about children. She constantly asked when she'd have grandchildren. "David needs to carry on the family line," she'd say. "This family name can't disappear." When we tried to explain our situation, she'd act like I was preventing David from having children. 2 years ago, Margaret's behavior became even stranger. She started trying to pull David away from me. "Son, you look so tired," she'd say. "Is Rachel wearing you out?" Sometimes, when David came home from work, I'd learn that Margaret had called and talked for hours. David wouldn't share the content of these conversations with me, just saying, "Mom's worried, ignore it." One day, I saw messages from Margaret on David's phone. "That girl doesn't make you happy. You deserve better," she wrote. When I asked David about these messages, he said, "Don't take Mom seriously. She's getting older and sometimes says crazy things." But I knew Margaret was completely conscious of what she was doing. Last year, David's health problems started. Constant fatigue, chest pains, and shortness of breath. We went to the doctor, had many tests done. The results came back fine, but David was going through a stressful period. He was managing a big project at work and working too much. Margaret became even more involved during this time. She started coming to the house constantly, trying to control David. "You're not paying attention to David's nutrition," she'd tell me. "You don't care about his health." I was cooking every meal, taking David to doctors, monitoring his medications, but nothing was ever enough for Margaret. When that terrible Tuesday morning came, David was getting ready to go to the office. He said, "My chest hurts a little." "You should stay home today," I suggested. But he said he had an important meeting he couldn't miss. "It's just stress," he said, kissing me. "Can you give me a massage when I get home tonight?" That massage Never happened. In the afternoon, I got a call from the hospital. David had collapsed at the office, had a heart attack. By the time I got to the hospital, it was too late. He was 34 years old. Margaret's behavior on the day of the funeral was very strange. She kept crying, screaming, "My son, my everything!" But at the same time, she was looking at me strangely, like she was planning something. 1 week after the funeral, while I was packing up David's things, Margaret came to my door. "Rachel, there's something important we need to discuss. There are things about David's life you don't know." I let her in. We sat across from each other in the living room. Margaret was holding an envelope. "David cheated on you," she said in a cold voice. "He has a child with another woman, and in his will, he left a share to this child, too." I kept smiling as I looked at Margaret's face. "This is a very interesting story," I said in a calm voice. "But there's a problem." "A problem?" Margaret said, frowning. "Is this how you react when you learn David cheated on you?" "No," I said, putting the document on the table. "The problem is that it's physically impossible for David to have a child with another woman." "What do you mean?" "Don't you know David had a vasectomy?" I said. 2.5 years ago. For the first time, I saw Margaret's confident demeanor falter. That's not possible. David never told me anything like that." "Of course he didn't tell you, because this was a private matter between us. But you were following him so closely. How did you miss this detail?" Panic appeared in her eyes. "Vasectomy? You're lying. Wouldn't David ever want children?" "On the contrary, he wanted children, but doctors forced him into this operation for medical reasons." I got up from the table and went to David's study. I brought back the medical reports I pulled from the filing cabinet. "Here are the doctor's reports. You can see the vasectomy date. 2.5 years before Josh's birth date." Margaret took the documents in her hands and read them. Her hands were shaking. This is impossible. My plan, what I meant to say." "Your plan?" I said. "Oh yes, this was a plan, wasn't it, Margaret? A plan you made to get me out of here after David died." Margaret stood up. "You don't know what you're talking about, Rachel. David really loved someone else. Emily is a real person. Then can I meet Emily? Can I see Josh? If it's true, if he's David's child, I'd like to meet him too." Margaret couldn't say anything. She opened and closed her mouth several times. "Or is there no such person as Emily?" I continued. "And Josh isn't David's child either, just like this will is fake." "Rachel, you're very stressed. You lost your husband. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe—" "Margaret," I said in a stern voice, "get out of my house and don't ever come back with such nonsense again." "I'm David's mother," she started. "You, being David's mother, are someone who tried to deceive his wife just 1 week after his death. You should be ashamed." Margaret gathered her envelope and headed for the door, but she turned around before leaving. "This doesn't end here, Rachel. David has a real will, and I'm going to find it." "Good luck with that," I said, closing the door behind her. After Margaret left, I sat at David's desk. As I looked at the vasectomy reports in my hands, I remembered those days. 2.5 years ago, David had been complaining about back pain for a long time. When he went to the doctor, they discovered an important problem. There was a tumor in his spine. Benign, meaning non-cancerous, but surgery was required. "The operation is very delicate," the doctor had said. "Due to the location of the tumor, some nerves might be damaged. This could affect the reproductive organs." The operation went successfully. The tumor was removed. But, as the doctor had said, there was some nerve damage. David's sperm production completely stopped. They had to perform a vasectomy. "This means," the doctor had said, "you can no longer have children." David and I were very upset when we received this news. We had been trying to have children for years, and our last hope had been closed. But David handled the situation very maturely. He had said in the hospital room, "Rachel, look at me. I love you. Not having children doesn't change anything. You and we're already a family." We hadn't shared the situation with anyone, only our closest friends Lisa and Mark knew. We hadn't even told our families, because especially Margaret was constantly pressuring us about grandchildren, and we knew if we told her the truth, she would pressure us even more. After David recovered, our life returned to normal. Maybe we were even happier. The stress about children was gone, now we could just focus on each other. But Margaret's behavior never improved. Actually, it got worse. She constantly told David he deserved a better life. She made it clear she wasn't satisfied with me. 6 months ago, David told me something very important. Rachel, I'm worried about Mom. Lately, she's been asking strange questions. What kind of questions? About our finances, the house, bank accounts. Like, she's planning something. What kind of plan could it be? I don't know, but we should be careful. Margaret can be very manipulative. At the time, I told David he was being dramatic. But now I understood David was right. Margaret was really making a plan. After David's death, I now better understood Margaret's behavior. At the funeral, she was constantly watching me. On the days I was packing David's things, she kept calling and offering help. But actually, she was trying to check the valuable things in the house. One day, David's lawyer, James, called. Rachel, we need to talk about David's will. Margaret called me and claims there were some changes to the will. What kind of changes? She says David had another child and left inheritance to him too. But I didn't make such a change. David's last will was the one we made 2 years ago. There were no changes. Margaret is lying, James. It's impossible for David to have another child. I understand. But Margaret insists. She even came to me with a fake will. Of course it's obviously fake. Fake? Yes! Even David's signature isn't right. The legal language is completely wrong too. It's amateur work. After this phone conversation, I realized Margaret's plan was much bigger. She didn't just want to get me out of the house, she was trying to get her hands on all of David's inheritance. The next day, I called David's closest friend, Mark. Mark, did Margaret talk to you after David died? Yes, she called several times. She was asking weird questions. What kind of questions? About David's finances, bank accounts, the house, investments. I told her I didn't know about these things. Then I told her how devoted David was to you. That's when she got angry and hung up. Now Margaret's intention was very clear. The moment David died, she had sprung into action to steal his inheritance. The fake will, the fake child story, a fake woman named Emily. Everything was a deception set up to get me out of the house. But Margaret hadn't counted on one thing. She didn't know David had a vasectomy. And this was the detail that brought down her entire plan. The phone rang. It was Margaret. Rachel, we need to talk. Emily is a real person, and Josh really is David's son. Margaret, I told you David had a vasectomy. Vasectomies can be reversed. Maybe David had it done secretly. I have the doctor's reports. David's sperm production completely stopped. This is an irreversible condition. Silence on the phone. Then Margaret's voice was heard. You don't know David's secrets, Rachel. He didn't love you. He told me so. Margaret, enough already. You know David had a vasectomy. There's no such person as Emily. There's no child named Josh. You have a fake will, and you've been caught. This isn't over, Rachel. I'm David's mother, and I will protect my rights. She hung up. Now I needed to take serious steps. Margaret wasn't just trying to deceive me, she was also trying to gain financial benefit by taking advantage of David's death. I had to end this situation. The next morning, I called David's lawyer, James Wilson, and scheduled an emergency meeting. His office was located in a historic brownstone building downtown, the kind of place that screamed old money and discretion. When I arrived, James's secretary immediately recognized me, her expression softening with sympathy. Mrs. Thompson, she said, standing to greet me, Mr. Wilson is expecting you. Please accept my condolences for your loss. James was in his early 60s with silver hair and reading glasses. He had been David's mentor when David first started practicing law, and they had maintained a close friendship even after David switched firms. He stood when I entered, coming around his desk to hug me briefly. Rachel, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I was devastated to hear about David. He was one of the good ones. He was. I agreed, my voice catching slightly. And it seems he was also right about preparing for trouble with my mother-in-law. I explained what had happened with Margaret, showing him the forged will she had presented. James examined it carefully, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "This is amateurish forgery," he said finally. "The language is all wrong, and the signature, while similar, would never stand up to expert analysis. But the fact that she created this at all is deeply troubling." I showed him the documents I had brought. The medical records confirming David's vasectomy, David's legitimate will, and notes I had kept about Margaret's strange behavior over the years. David was nothing if not thorough, James said, reviewing the materials. These medical records alone disprove her claim about Josh's paternity. The vasectomy was performed 2.5 years before this alleged child was conceived. It's biologically impossible for David to be the father. "What should I do?" I asked. "I don't want to humiliate her publicly, but I can't let her steal David's inheritance based on lies." James leaned back in his chair, considering. "First, we need more information. I recommend hiring a private investigator to look into Margaret's current situation. There's likely motivation beyond simple cruelty here. People rarely attempt fraud of this nature without serious financial pressure." He recommended Frank Rodriguez, a former Boston police detective who now worked as a private investigator, often on cases for law firms. I agreed, and James made the call immediately, explaining the situation broadly. Frank arrived an hour later, a stocky man in his 50s with a no-nonsense attitude and a thick Boston accent. He took detailed notes as I explained the situation, asking pointed questions about Margaret's financial status, her living situation, and any recent changes in her behavior. "I'll need a few days," Frank said when I had finished. "My preliminary focus will be on her financial situation and any recent activities that might explain this sudden desperation. Is there anything else I can tell you about her current circumstances?" I shared what little I knew about Margaret's life. She lived alone in a small apartment about 20 miles outside the city. She had been on Social Security since retiring from her job as a bank teller 5 years ago. David had been sending her $300 a month to help with expenses, but I wasn't sure if she had other sources of income or significant debts. "She's always been the type to live beyond her means," I told Frank. David used to worry about her spending habits, but she'd get defensive whenever he'd try to discuss her finances. "That's a good starting point," he nodded, making notes. "I'll also look into whether she's been in contact with any lawyers or document forgers recently. Creating fake legal documents requires either skill or connections." 3 days later, Frank called requesting a meeting at James's office. When I arrived, both men were reviewing documents spread across the conference table, their expressions grim. "Mrs. Thompson," Frank began once we were seated, "I've uncovered some very concerning information about your mother-in-law's situation. According to his investigation, Margaret was in severe financial trouble. She had accumulated over $60,000 in debt across multiple credit cards and personal loans. Her monthly Social Security barely covered her rent, and she had been living on credit for at least 2 years. She's also been borrowing money from several people. Friends, former coworkers, even her neighbors. Small amounts, usually a few $100s at a time, with promises to pay back quickly. But the most damning discovery was a series of internet searches on Margaret's computer. Frank had obtained this information through a contact who specialized in digital forensics. He's been researching how to forge legal documents, specifically wills and estate documents. He looked up David's signature samples online, apparently from some charity auction photos where he signed documents publicly. The search history showed Margaret had spent weeks researching estate law, looking up the value of our house, and even investigating the process for contesting wills. One particularly telling search was, how long after death can inheritance be claimed? "There's more," Frank said. "I found evidence she's been telling people in her neighborhood about coming into money soon. Her landlord told me she'd been reassuring him about late rent payments, saying she'd have a large sum within a few weeks." James examined the documents, shaking his head. This shows clear premeditation. She didn't just make up the story on the spot. She's been planning this since David's death, possibly even before. What about this Emily person she mentioned? And the child? Frank smiled grimly. Complete fabrication. I searched extensively for any Emily connected to David or your family. There's no record of David ever being in contact with anyone by that name in a romantic context. As for Josh, she seems to have invented him entirely. So what are my options now? I asked, looking between the two men. James removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. You have several routes, Rachel. We could file criminal charges against Margaret for attempted fraud and forgery. Given the amount of money involved, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, this would likely result in serious penalties, possibly even jail time. Or, I prompted, sensing there was another option. Or, he continued, we could handle this privately. Confront her with all the evidence, make it clear we know exactly what she's done, and give her a choice. Face criminal prosecution, or agree to stop this behavior permanently. Frank leaned forward. There's one more thing you should consider. Margaret's in severe financial straits. People in that situation can become unpredictable, sometimes dangerous. If you corner her completely without offering any way out, she might escalate to more extreme measures. What do you mean? I asked, feeling a chill. Break-ins, harassment, possibly even violence, Frank said bluntly. I've seen desperate people do terrible things when they feel they have nothing left to lose. I left the meeting with a heavy heart and a folder full of evidence. The woman who had raised David, who I had tried to respect as his mother despite her difficult personality, had been planning to rob me while I grieved my husband's death. It was almost too cruel to believe. That evening, I sat in David's study, surrounded by his books and the smell of his cologne that still lingered on his clothes. I needed to decide how to handle Margaret, but I also needed to understand why she had chosen this path. Looking at our wedding photos on David's desk, I remembered something he had told me years ago. Mom has always been afraid of being left with nothing. Her own parents died poor, and I think that fear never left her. Maybe understanding her motivation didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me figure out how to respond. Margaret wasn't just greedy, she was terrified, and desperate people make desperate choices. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. It was time to end this, one way or another. Margaret answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. Rachel, why are you calling so late? We need to talk, I said firmly. Tomorrow afternoon. Come to my house at 2 o'clock. Just you. Is this about the will? Because I've been thinking maybe we can work something out. Margaret, I interrupted, just be here at 2. We have a lot to discuss. I hung up before she could respond. The next morning, I spent time preparing for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. Following James's advice, I set up a recording device on the coffee table and arranged all the evidence in neat folders. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath before opening the door. Margaret stood on the porch wearing a new outfit I'd never seen before, her confidence evident in her posture. Come in, I said, leaving her to the living room where I had set up 2 chairs facing each other. Between them sat a coffee table with the recording device, water glasses, and several folders of documents. I hope you don't mind if we record our conversation, I said calmly. It seems wise given the legal nature of what we're discussing. Margaret hesitated only briefly before nodding. Sure, whatever makes you comfortable, though I think this should be pretty straightforward. I turned on the recorder, stating the date and time and confirming Margaret's consent to be recorded. Then I sat back, studying my mother-in-law's face. Before we discuss anything else, I'd like you to tell me exactly what you claim happened between David and this Emily person. Margaret launched into what was clearly a rehearsed story. According to her version, Emily was a paralegal at a law firm downtown. She claimed David had met Emily at a legal conference 18 months ago, that they had begun an affair, and that Josh was conceived during their relationship. David felt terrible about betraying you, Margaret said, her eyes wide with practiced sincerity. But Emily understood him in ways you never could. She appreciated his ambition, his intelligence. David told me he had never felt so alive. I listened without interrupting, taking notes about the inconsistencies in her timeline and details that contradicted what I knew about David's schedule during that period. "And when exactly did David tell you about this affair?" I asked. "About 6 months ago," Margaret replied quickly. "He was torn up about it. He wanted to tell you, but Emily was pregnant and he didn't want to stress you out." "Which law firm did Emily work for?" Margaret faltered slightly. "Morrison and Associates, downtown." I made a note. "And how often did David see Emily?" "Usually twice a week. Tuesday evenings and Saturday afternoons when you thought he was playing golf." I continued with increasingly specific questions. What restaurant did David and Emily usually go to? What car did Emily drive? What was her last name? With each question, Margaret's answers became more vague and contradictory. "Why does any of this matter?" she finally snapped. "The point is that Josh is David's son, and the will proves David wanted to provide for him." "Actually," I said calmly, opening my first folder, "both of those claims are demonstrably false." I placed the medical records on the table between us. 18 months before Josh was allegedly conceived, David had a vasectomy following surgery for a spinal tumor. It was completely successful, confirmed by follow-up tests. It was physically impossible for him to father a child after that procedure. Margaret's face drained of color. She picked up the medical records with trembling hands, scanning the clinical language and dates. "These could be fake," she said weakly. "They're not. And David's doctor is prepared to testify to their authenticity if necessary. But that's just the beginning." Next, I produced David's legitimate will, notarized and properly filed with the court. This is David's actual will, prepared by James Wilson and witnessed by 2 partners at his firm. As you can see, it leaves everything to me, with no mention of any Josh. Margaret's confidence was visibly crumbling, but she attempted to rally. "He must have changed it after this was drawn up. The will I have is more recent." "The will you have," I said evenly, "is a forgery. A poor one, I might add. James has already identified multiple legal inconsistencies in the language, and the signature is clearly fake. Creating a fraudulent will is a felony in Massachusetts, punishable by up to 7 years in prison." I continued methodically presenting evidence. Frank's investigation into her financial troubles, her internet search history showing research into document forgery, and testimony from her neighbors about her claims of coming into money soon. "We know everything, Margaret," I said as she sat in stunned silence. "The question now is what happens next." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, to my surprise, she began to cry. Not the theatrical tears I had seen her use to manipulate David over the years, but deep, body-racking sobs. "I didn't know what else to do," she finally said between gasps. "I'm going to lose my apartment. I owe so much money to so many people. I thought if I could just get some of David's inheritance." "So you decided to destroy David's reputation? To tell everyone he cheated on me? To forge legal documents?" "I was desperate. You have everything. This big house, a successful business, everyone's respect. What do I have? $60,000 in debt and a Social Security check that barely covers rent. You try making good decisions in that situation." Her outburst hung in the air between us. The raw honesty of it, stripped from manipulation and lies, reached something in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. "So, Emily doesn't exist?" I asked more gently. "No," she shook her head. "No, I made her up. Josh, too. I thought if I claimed David had a secret child, you'd be so shocked and hurt that you'd just give me money to make the problem go away." "And the will? My friend Carl helped me create it. He does graphic design and thought it would be easy to fake a signature. I found samples of David's signature online from those charity auction photos. I was going to use it to pressure you into giving me half the value of the house." I turned off the recorder and sat back, considering my options. Margaret watched me nervously, clearly expecting the worst. "I could press charges," I said finally. "What you did was illegal, not to mention cruel and calculated." She nodded miserably. "I know. But sending you to prison won't bring David back, and it won't undo the damage you've tried to cause." Margaret looked up hopefully. "So what What are you going to do? I leaned forward, making sure she was looking directly at me. Here's what's going to happen. First, I said, maintaining eye contact with Margaret, you're going to tell everyone the truth, that you lied about the affair, that there is no Emily, that there is no Josh, and that you forged David's will. You will apologize publicly to me and to David's memory. Margaret's face went pale. Everyone? You mean like announce it? I mean a family gathering. David's colleagues who heard your lies. Anyone you told the story to. You will set the record straight, completely and honestly. And then what? She asked, her voice small. I'll still owe all that money. I'll still lose my apartment. I'm not finished, I said. In exchange for your full confession and a legal agreement never to attempt anything like this again, I will help you with your financial situation. Her eyes widened in surprise. You'd help me? After what I did? Not for you, I said honestly, for David. Because despite everything you've done, you're still his mother and he loved you. He wouldn't want to see you homeless or in jail. I pulled out a sheet of paper that I had prepared. There will be conditions, strict conditions. You will enter financial counseling and learn to manage money properly. You will get a part-time job within 60 days, something appropriate for your age and skills. And you will never, ever try to manipulate me or damage David's memory again. What kind of help are you talking about? Margaret asked cautiously. I'll pay off your debts. All. $60,000. And I'll give you 6 months' rent to get you stable. But that's it. No more bailouts, no more handouts. You'll have a clean slate, but what you do with it is up to you. Margaret stared at me in shock. Why would you do that? Because David always said family was important, even when that family disappoints you. But Margaret, understand this clearly. This is your one chance. If you violate any part of our agreement, if you try to scam me again, if you spread lies about David, I will press criminal charges and you will go to prison. Is that understood? She nodded frantically. Yes, I understand. Rachel, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet. Think about it overnight. If you agree, we'll meet with James tomorrow to formalize everything legally. You'll sign documents acknowledging your fraud and agreeing to the terms. And this weekend, we'll have a family dinner where you'll tell everyone the truth. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. The family dinner. Will David's parents be there? His brother Michael? Everyone, I confirmed. Your sister Linda, too. Everyone who might have heard your lies needs to hear the truth. They're going to hate me, she whispered. They're going to be disappointed, I corrected. But they'll also see that you're taking responsibility and trying to make things right. That's what matters. Margaret gathered her purse, her movements slow and uncertain. At the door, she paused. Rachel, can I ask you something? What? Why didn't David ever tell me about the vasectomy? He's his mother. I thought we were close. I considered my answer carefully. Because you had spent years pressuring us about grandchildren. David knew that if you learned the truth, you'd either blame me or suggest retry expensive treatments that might not work. He was protecting both of us from that stress. Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. I did push too hard about grandchildren, didn't I? Yes, I said simply. You did. I just wanted David to have everything. A family, children to carry on his name. I thought that's what would make him happy. David was happy. He was happy with Moo, with our life together, with our decision to focus on each other instead of what we couldn't have. Your constant pressure was the only thing that made him sad about our situation. Margaret absorbed this silently. Then she asked, Do you think David would forgive me for what I tried to do? I don't know, I answered honestly. But I think he'd want you to learn from this and do better going forward. After Margaret left, I called James to update him on the conversation. I told him she confessed to everything and she's agreed to my terms. Are you sure about paying her debts? That's a substantial amount of money and, frankly, more than she deserves after what she tried to pull. I know, but David always felt responsible for her. He sent her money every month, worried about her constantly. This way, I can honor that part of him while also setting clear boundaries. What if she doesn't follow through on her end of the bargain? Then she goes to prison, I said simply. I'm prepared for that possibility, but I'm hoping she's scared enough now to stay on the right path. The next day, Margaret arrived at James's office looking tired but determined. She had clearly spent the night thinking about everything. I accept your terms, she said as soon as she sat down. All of them. James had prepared several documents, a confession acknowledging her fraud, an agreement to the repayment terms, and a restraining order that would go into effect if she violated any conditions. This confession, James explained to Margaret, admits to attempted fraud and forgery. If you sign this and then break the agreement, it can be used as evidence against you in criminal court. Margaret read everything carefully, asking a few questions about the job requirement and financial counseling. When she was satisfied, she signed each document. There's one more thing, I said as we prepared to leave. The family dinner is this Saturday at 5 o'clock. I'll provide the food, but you need to be prepared to tell the complete truth. What should I say exactly? Margaret asked nervously. The truth. That you lied because you were desperate for money, that David never cheated, never had another child, and never changed his will, that you forged documents and made up an elaborate story, and that you're sorry. What if they ask why I did it? Tell them you were scared and made terrible choices. Don't make excuses. Don't blame anyone else. Just take responsibility. Margaret nodded. And after that, after I tell everyone, after that, you start over. You go to financial counseling, you find a job, and you build a new relationship with this family based on honesty instead of manipulation. As we left James's office, Margaret turned to me one more time. Rachel, I know I don't deserve your help, but thank you. Don't thank me yet. Show me that David's faith in people's ability to change wasn't misplaced. Saturday was coming quickly, and I needed to prepare for what would likely be one of the most difficult family dinners of my life. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonably chill wind. I had spent the afternoon preparing dinner for 8 people. David's parents, Robert and Susan, his brother Michael and sister-in-law Jennifer, Margaret's sister Linda, Margaret herself, and me. The dining room table that David and I had bought for entertaining was now set for the most uncomfortable meal of my life. I had called everyone during the week, simply saying that Margaret had something important to share about David's estate and that it was crucial everyone attend. The curiosity and concern in their voices made me feel sick to my stomach, knowing what was coming. Robert and Susan arrived first, both looking worried. David's father was a retired engineer, practical and straightforward, while Susan had been a high school English teacher. They had always been kind to me, treating me like the daughter they never had. Rachel, dear, Susan said, embracing me at the door. You look tired. Are you eating enough? I'm managing, I said, not quite meeting her eyes. How are you both holding up? Some days are harder than others, Robert replied. But we're worried about you living in this big house all alone. And now Margaret says there's some issue with David's estate? Let's wait until everyone's here, I said, leading them to the living room. Can I get you something to drink? Michael and Jennifer arrived next. David's younger brother was a software engineer like David had been, but with a more serious personality. Jennifer was a nurse, compassionate, but no nonsense. They had 2 young children who were staying with Jennifer's parents for the evening. This is very mysterious, Michael said, accepting a glass of wine. Margaret called us too, saying there were complications with the estate. Is someone contesting the will? Something like that, I said vaguely. We'll discuss everything once everyone's here. Linda, Margaret's older sister, arrived looking confused and slightly annoyed. She was a retired bank manager, practical like Robert, but with less patience for drama. I don't understand why I need to be here, Linda said bluntly. Margaret said it was about David's will, but I'm not even related to David. You'll understand soon, I promised, my stomach churning with anxiety. Finally, Margaret arrived, looking pale and nervous. She was carrying a manila folder, and her hands were visibly shaking. Everyone turned to look at her as she entered the dining room. Thank you all for coming, I said, remaining standing while everyone else took their seats. Margaret has something very important to tell all of you. Something that affects David's memory and our family. The room fell silent. Margaret looked around the table at all the expectant faces, then down at her hands. I need to confess something, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Something terrible that I did. Robert leaned forward. What are you talking about, Margaret? Margaret took a shaky breath. Last month, I told Rachel that David had cheated on her. I said he had a child with another woman named Emily, and that he had changed his will to include this child. Gasps echoed around the table. Susan's hand flew to her mouth, and Michael's face darkened with anger. What? Robert said sharply. David would never. No, he wouldn't, because none of it was true. I made it all up. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer was the first to speak. You made it up? You mean you lied about David having an affair? Margaret nodded miserably. There is no Emily. There is no child named Josh. David never cheated on Rachel, and he never changed his will. Michael's voice was cold. Then the hell would you say something like that? Because I was desperate for money. I owe $60,000 in credit card debt. I was about to be evicted from my apartment. I thought if I could convince Rachel that David had another child who deserved part of the inheritance. You thought you could steal from Rachel? Linda said, her voice rising. While she was grieving your son? I even forged a will. I had someone help me fake David's signature. I was going to use this to force Rachel to give me money. Robert stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You forged legal documents, Margaret? That's a felony. I know it was wrong. I was just so scared and desperate. I didn't think clearly. Susan's voice was shaking with emotion. How could you do this to Rachel? To David's memory, your own son? And you tried to make us all believe David was an adulterer, Michael added, his anger building. Do you have any idea what that would have done to his reputation, to how we remember him? Margaret was crying openly now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know what I did was unforgivable. Linda looked mortified. Margaret, I can't believe you're my sister. This is beyond anything I could have imagined. How did you even think you'd get away with this? Jennifer asked. Didn't you realize Rachel would investigate? I thought she was too grief-stricken to question it. I thought if I presented her with official-looking documents, she'd just believe it and give me money to make the problem go away. Robert sat back down heavily. So what happens now? Are you going to prison? Everyone looked at me. This was the moment I had dreaded, explaining my decision to help Margaret instead of prosecuting her. Rachel discovered the truth very quickly. David had medical procedures that made it impossible for him to father children in the time frame Margaret claimed. She was caught in her lie immediately. Good, Michael said firmly. So when does she get arrested? She's not going to be arrested, I said quietly. The room erupted in protests. What do you mean she's not going to be arrested? Susan demanded. Rachel! She tried to steal from you? Robert added. She committed fraud, Michael said, standing again. She can't just walk away from this. I held up my hand for silence. Margaret and I have reached an agreement. She's going to get financial counseling, find a job, and rebuild her life honestly. In exchange, I'm going to help her with her debts so she can start fresh. The silence that followed was different from before, shocked rather than expectant. You're going to help her? Linda asked incredulously. After what she tried to do to you? Because that's what David would have wanted. He loved his mother despite her flaws. He always worried about her financial situation. This way, I can honor that part of him while also making sure this never happens again. Michael shook his head. Rachel, you're being too generous. She doesn't deserve your help. Maybe not, I agreed. But sometimes doing the right thing isn't about what people deserve. It's about what kind of person you choose to be. Margaret looked up at me through her tears. I don't deserve this kindness. But I promise you, Rachel, I will spend the rest of my life making this right. See that you don't, Robert said sternly. Because next time, there won't be any mercy from this family. The remainder of the dinner was tense but necessary. Everyone had questions about the details, about how Margaret had planned the deception, about what safeguards were in place to prevent future problems. By the end of the evening, while no one was happy about the situation, they understood my decision. As people prepared to leave, Susan pulled me aside. David would be proud of you, she said softly, for how you handled this, for protecting his memory, and for finding a way to help Margaret despite what she did. I hope so, I replied. I just want to honor the man he was. Margaret was the last to leave. At the door, she turned to me one final time. I know words aren't enough, but I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making this right. I'm counting on it, I replied, closing the door behind her. 3 weeks after the family dinner, I sat in the waiting room of Financial Freedom Counseling Services with Margaret. True to her word, she had followed through on every commitment so far. I had paid off her $60,000 in debt and covered 6 months of her rent. But now came the harder part, learning to manage money responsibly. Mrs. Davis will see you now, the receptionist announced. Margaret looked nervous as we walked into the office of Patricia Davis, a certified financial counselor who specialized in helping people rebuild their financial lives. Patricia was a woman in her 50s with kind but serious eyes. So, Margaret, Patricia began after reviewing the intake forms, Rachel has explained your situation to me. You've been given a clean slate financially, but you've also accumulated debt before. Help me understand how that happened. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I never learned to budget properly. When David was young, my husband handled all the finances. After he died 15 years ago, I spent money when I had it and used credit cards when I didn't. Did you keep track of your spending? Not really. I knew generally what I owed, but I didn't realize how much interest was accumulating. I thought I could always catch up somehow. Patricia nodded, making notes. That's a common pattern. The good news is that financial literacy can be learned at any age, but it requires commitment and honesty with you. Over the next hour, Patricia walked Margaret through basic budgeting principles, showed her how to track expenses, and explained how credit card interest worked. Margaret asked intelligent questions and took careful notes. I had no idea that interest rates were that high, Margaret said when Patricia showed her calculations. No wonder I could never catch up. This is why education is so important, Patricia replied. Your homework for next week is to track every single expense, no matter how small. Write down everything. As we left the office, Margaret turned to me. Rachel, I want you to know, this is eye-opening. I feel stupid for not understanding these things before. You're not stupid, I said. You just weren't taught. That's different. Would you mind if I called you during the week if I have questions about the budgeting exercise? I hesitated. While I wanted to support Margaret's rehabilitation, I also needed to maintain boundaries. You can call me once a week to update me on your progress. But Margaret, part of learning independence is solving problems yourself first. She nodded understanding. Of course. I don't want to mess this up. The next week, Margaret called me on Thursday evening, her voice excited. Rachel, I tracked my expenses like Patricia suggested, and I couldn't believe what I found. What did you find? I was spending almost $300 a month on things I didn't even remember buying. Coffee shops, impulse purchases at the grocery store, subscription services I forgot I had. Just little things, but they added up to so much money. That's great awareness, Margaret. What are you going to do about it? I canceled the subscriptions I don't use, and I'm making coffee at home now. Patricia says if I stick to the budget she helped me create, I'll actually have money left over each month. I could hear genuine enthusiasm in her voice, something I hadn't heard from Margaret in years. 2 months into the counseling program, Margaret called with bigger news. I got a job, she announced, part-time at the library downtown, 20 hours a week, helping with filing and customer service. That's wonderful, Margaret. How do you feel about it? Nervous, but excited. I haven't worked in 5 years, but the librarian, Nancy, is very patient. She says my experience at the bank will be helpful for handling money transactions and customer interactions. And the pay will help you maintain your independence. Exactly. Patricia calculated that with my Social Security and this job, I'll be able to cover all my expenses and even save a little each month. I never thought that would be possible. The transformation in Margaret over those first 3 months was remarkable. She had lost weight, started dressing more professionally for her job, and most importantly, she seemed to have found a sense of purpose again. During one of our weekly check-ins, she shared something unexpected. Rachel, I've been thinking a lot about David lately. Not just missing him, but really thinking about the kind of man he was. What do you mean? He was always so responsible with money. so thoughtful about decisions. I realize now that I never appreciated those qualities. I always pushed him to be more spontaneous, to spend more freely. I thought I was encouraging him to enjoy life, but maybe I was just projecting my own financial carelessness onto him. This level of self-reflection was new for Margaret. What made you think about this? Patricia asked me to identify people in my life who had good financial habits to use as role models. The first person I thought of was David. He always saved money, always researched big purchases, always lived within his means. I used to tease him about being too careful, but he was actually being smart. David was very responsible, but he also knew how to enjoy life. He just did it within his means. I remember when you two bought this house, David spent months researching the neighborhood, getting inspections, negotiating the price. I thought he was being obsessive, but now I understand he was protecting your financial future. It was the first time Margaret had spoken about David with true understanding rather than the idealized version she had created in her mind. By month 4, Margaret had fully settled into her new routine. She was excelling at her library job, had completed her financial counseling program with flying colors, and was even attending a grief support group that Patricia had recommended. The grief group was your idea? I asked during one of our calls. Patricia suggested it. She said that people often make poor financial decisions when they're dealing with unresolved emotional issues. I realized I never properly grieved my husband's death 15 years ago, and then, when David died, I had all this accumulated sadness and fear that I didn't know how to handle. How is the group helping? I'm learning that grief can make you feel desperate and irrational. Understanding that helps me recognize when I'm about to make an emotional decision instead of a logical one. This insight surprised me. Margaret was developing emotional intelligence that I had never seen from her before. There's something else, Margaret continued. I've been volunteering at a local charity that helps seniors with financial planning. Sharing what I've learned with other people in similar situations makes me feel like something good came out of my mistakes. That's wonderful, Margaret. David would be proud of how you've turned your life around. Do you really think so? She asked, and I could hear the genuine uncertainty in her voice. I do. The Margaret that tried to defraud me 6 months ago was desperate and scared. The Margaret talking to me now is taking responsibility, helping others, and building a stable life. That's the kind of change that would make David happy. 8 months after the confrontation, I found myself in an unexpected place, having coffee with Margaret at the library where she worked. She had asked me to stop by to see her workplace, and I was curious to see how she was adapting to her new life. The downtown library was a beautiful old building with high ceilings and large windows. Margaret greeted me at the information desk wearing a simple blue cardigan and a genuine smile I hadn't seen in years. "Rachel, thank you for coming," she said, her voice warm but professional. "Let me show you around." As we walked through the library, several patrons and coworkers greeted Margaret by name. She clearly had developed genuine relationships here. "Mrs. Thompson, this is my daughter-in-law, Rachel," Margaret said, introducing me to Nancy, the head librarian. "Oh, Rachel, Margaret talks about you often. She's told me how supportive you've been during her transition." I was surprised by this description. In my mind, I had simply held Margaret accountable. But seeing her in this environment, I realized how much she had genuinely changed. "Margaret has become indispensable here," Nancy continued. "She has such a gentle way with our elderly patrons, especially those struggling with technology or financial documents." After Nancy left, Margaret led me to a quiet corner where we could talk. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling out a small notebook. "Remember how Patricia taught me to track expenses? Well, I never stopped. 8 months later, and I still write down every penny." She flipped through pages of careful handwriting, grocery receipts, utility bills, even 50-cent donations to the library's coffee fund. Everything was categorized and totaled. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a summary page. "Last month, I actually saved $87. $87! I haven't had savings since before my husband died." Her pride was infectious. "That's amazing, Margaret. How does it feel?" "Secure," she said without hesitation. "For the first time in 15 years, I'm not afraid to open my mailbox. I know exactly what bills are coming and that I can pay them." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching library patrons browse the shelves. Then Margaret spoke again. Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Okay. Do you think David would forgive me? Not just for the fraud attempt, but for all the years I made his life difficult with my criticism and demands? It was a question I had been expecting, but I still needed time to consider my answer. I think David understood that you acted out of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of not having enough money, fear of losing control. He never wanted to cut you out of his life, even when you made things difficult. But would he forgive me? Margaret, David forgave you years ago for being imperfect. The question is whether you can forgive yourself and commit to being the mother he always hoped you could be. Tears gathered in her eyes. I wasted so much time being jealous and critical. I could have had a real relationship with him instead of always pushing and demanding. You can't change the past, I said gently. But you can honor his memory by being the person he believed you could become. Margaret wiped her eyes and nodded. I'm trying. Every day I'm trying. As we prepared to leave, Margaret mentioned something that surprised me. Robert and Susan invited me to Thanksgiving dinner next week. The whole family will be there. Michael, Jennifer, the kids. They said they want to give me another chance. How do you feel about that? Terrified, she admitted, but grateful. I know I have to earn their trust back, and it might take years. Are you ready for that? I have to be. This family is all I have left of David. Thanksgiving turned out to be a revelation. I arrived at Robert and Susan's house with homemade dessert, nervous about how the dynamics would play out. Margaret was already there, quietly helping Susan in the kitchen. She's been here for 2 hours, Michael told me, pulling me aside. Arrived early, brought groceries, and hasn't said one critical or demanding thing. It's like she's a different person. During dinner, Margaret was subdued but present. She asked thoughtful questions about Michael's work, complimented Jennifer on her recent promotion, and listened attentively when the children talked about school. Most remarkably, she didn't once mention money, her health complaints, or her own problems. Margaret, how are things at the library? Robert asked during the main course. Wonderful, Margaret replied. I'm learning so much from the patrons, especially the elderly ones who come in for computer help. Some of them have such incredible life stories. Are you enjoying the work itself? Susan asked. More than I expected. There's something satisfying about helping people find information they need or teaching someone to use email to connect with their grandchildren. I feel useful in a way I haven't in years. Jennifer, who had been skeptical of Margaret's transformation, seemed genuinely impressed. That's beautiful, Margaret. It sounds like you found your calling. After dinner, while the others watched football, Margaret and I found ourselves alone on the back porch. This feels different, I observed. It is. Different. I'm different. She paused, gathering her thoughts. You know what the grief counselor helped me realize? I spent so many years being angry that my life didn't turn out the way I planned that I never appreciated what I actually had. What do you mean? I had a son who loved me despite my flaws. I had a daughter-in-law who treated me with respect even when I didn't earn it. I had a family that included me in their lives. But I was so focused on what I thought I deserved that I nearly destroyed all of it. What changed your perspective? Nearly losing everything, she said simply. When I realized that my lies could have sent me to prison, that I could have destroyed David's reputation forever, that I could have lost this family completely, it shocked me into seeing clearly. And what do you see now? That I had been given second chances my whole life, but I kept wasting them. You giving me this opportunity to rebuild, it's probably my last chance to get things right. As the evening wound down, Robert pulled me aside. I don't know what you did with Margaret, but whatever it was, it worked. She's more like the woman David always described to us, the mother he remembered from his childhood before fear and bitterness took over. She did the work herself. I just made it possible. Well, David would be proud of both of you. Driving home that night, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 10 months ago, I was a grieving widow confronting my mother-in-law's attempts to fraud me. Now I was witnessing a genuine transformation that honored David's memory better than any punishment could have. But more importantly, I was discovering my own capacity for forgiveness and my ability to create positive change even in the darkest circumstances. David had always believed in people's potential to grow and change. Through Margaret's transformation, I was learning to share that faith. 1 year after David's death, I stood in our backyard garden, watching the spring bulbs he had planted push through the soil. The daffodils were blooming in bright yellow clusters, a reminder that life continues even after devastating loss. So much had changed in that year, not just with Margaret, but with my own understanding of strength, forgiveness, and what it means to honor someone's memory. The grief support group I had joined 6 months earlier had become an unexpected source of comfort and wisdom. 8 strangers, bound together by loss, had become friends who understood each other in ways that well-meaning family and friends simply couldn't. The first year is about survival, our group leader, Dr. Sandra Martinez, had told us. The second year is about learning who you are without the person you lost. I was beginning to understand what she meant. For 11 years, I had been David's wife. Now I was learning to be Rachel, just Rachel again. My interior design business had grown significantly since David's death. Throwing myself into work had initially been a way to avoid grief, but it had evolved into something more meaningful. I had developed a specialty in helping other widows redesign their homes to reflect their new lives as single people. It's not about erasing memories, I would tell clients. It's about creating a space that honors the past while supporting your future. Last month, I had completed a particularly meaningful project for Barbara, a 70-year-old widow whose husband had died 2 years earlier. I couldn't figure out how to make this house feel like home again, Barbara had told me during our first consultation. Everything reminded me of Tom, but I didn't want to move. We had worked together to reorganize her living spaces, keeping Tom's favorite chair, but reupholstering it in a fabric Barbara loved. We created a memory wall with photos of their 50-year marriage while opening up the kitchen to make it more functional for entertaining her children and grandchildren. "This feels like my house now," Barbara had said when we finished, "but Tom is still here in all the right ways." That project had taught me something important about my own situation. I had been so focused on preserving everything exactly as David left it that I hadn't created space for my own growth, which brought me to a decision I had been contemplating for months. The previous week, I had received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Jonathan Hayes, a professor of architecture at Boston University. We had met at a charity fundraiser for grief counseling services, where I had been speaking about my experience with loss and forgiveness. "Rachel, I've been thinking about our conversation at the fundraiser," Jonathan had said. "You mentioned wanting to do more meaningful work. Have you ever considered teaching?" "Teaching what?" "Interior design, but with a focus on therapeutic spaces. I'm developing a new program that combines architecture, psychology, and design to help people create healing environments, and I think your perspective and experience would be invaluable." The idea intrigued me. What would that involve? Guest lectures initially, maybe developing into a part-time position. You'd be teaching students how design can support emotional healing and personal growth. After much consideration, I had decided to accept his offer. It felt like a natural extension of the work I was already doing with clients, and it honored David's belief in education and helping others. But the conversation with Jonathan had also awakened something in me. The realization that I was ready to consider new relationships, not to replace David, but to explore the possibility of loving again. Jonathan was divorced with 2 teenage children, thoughtful and kind with a quiet sense of humor. Our conversations had revealed shared interests in art, architecture, and social justice. When he'd asked me to dinner the previous week, I had surprised myself by saying yes. "I need to be honest about something," I had told him over dinner at a small bistro downtown. "This is my first date since my husband died. I'm not sure I know how to do this anymore." Jonathan had smiled, his brown eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that reminded me of David. "I'm not sure anyone really knows how to date at our age. We're both carrying history, loss, previous relationships, established lives. Maybe we just take it slowly and see what develops." "That sounds perfect," I had replied, feeling a flutter of excitement I hadn't experienced in over a year. As I tended to David's daffodils that spring morning, my phone rang. It was Margaret. "Rachel, I hope I'm not bothering you. I wanted to let you know I got promoted at the library." "That's wonderful! What's the new position?" Assistant Coordinator for Senior Services. Nancy says I have a natural gift for helping elderly patrons, especially with financial literacy programs. I'm so proud of you, Margaret. David would be proud too. There's something else, Margaret continued, her voice tentative. I met someone at the grief support group. This was unexpected news. Really? Tell me about him. His name is George. He lost his wife 3 years ago. He's retired from teaching high school math, and he volunteers at the community center teaching financial literacy to seniors. This sounds lovely. How do you feel about it? Scared, Margaret admitted, but also happy. George understands grief in a way that feels comforting, and he's seen me at my worst, dealing with my guilt and shame in group sessions, so there are no pretenses. Are you worried about David's reaction? Margaret was quiet for a moment. I used to think David would want me to stay alone forever, mourning him, but now I think he'd want me to be happy and to treat any new relationship with the honesty and respect I should have shown him. I think you're right, I said. David always wanted the people he loved to be happy. What about you? Are you thinking about dating again? I told her about Jonathan, about the teaching opportunity, about slowly rebuilding my life in ways that honored David while creating space for new experiences. It's strange, I reflected. A year ago, I thought moving forward meant betraying David's memory. Now I understand that staying stuck in grief would be the real betrayal. David was always pushing me to grow, to try new things, to help people. Everything I'm doing now reflects the values he taught me. You've taught me that too, Margaret said quietly. When you chose to help me instead of sending me to prison, you showed me what David meant about forgiveness and second chances. After we hung up, I walked back through the garden, noticing how much it had grown and changed since David planted it. Some plants had died, others had flourished, and new growth was emerging in unexpected places. That afternoon, I called Jonathan to confirm our plans for the weekend, a visit to the Museum of Fine Arts, followed by dinner. Then I called my grief support group friend Elena to update her on Margaret's progress in my teaching opportunity. It sounds like you're really building a new life, Elena observed. How does that feel? Like I'm finally learning to carry David with me instead of being buried under the weight of losing him. As evening approached, I prepared for a video call with a potential new client, a young mother whose husband had died in a car accident, leaving her to raise 2 small children alone in a house that felt too big and too full of memories. The work continues, I said to David's photo on my desk, but now I understand that healing others helps heal myself.
2 years after David's death, I stood before a packed auditorium at Boston University, preparing to give a lecture titled Design for Healing, Creating Spaces that Support Emotional Recovery. In the front row sat Jonathan, Margaret, and several members of my grief support group. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had once struggled to get out of bed after her husband's death was now teaching others about resilience and renewal. When we lose someone we love, I began, looking out at the mix of students and professionals in the audience, our physical environment can either trap us in grief or support our healing journey. Today, we'll explore how thoughtful design choices can honor our losses while creating space for growth. As I clicked through slides showing before and after photos of my clients' homes, I reflected on the unexpected path that had brought me here. David's death had initially felt like an ending, the conclusion of everything I thought my life would be. Margaret's betrayal had seemed like salt in an already devastating wound, but somehow both tragedies had become catalysts for transformation I never could have imagined. After the lecture, Jonathan and I walked across campus to his office. Our relationship had developed slowly and carefully over the past year. He understood that David would always be part of my story, and I appreciated his patience as I learned to love again without guilt. That was incredible, Jonathan said, squeezing my hand. The way you connected design principles to emotional healing, the students were completely engaged. It feels good to share what I've learned. Even the painful parts have value if they can help someone else. Speaking of helping others, Jonathan said with a smile, Margaret called my office earlier. She wanted to make sure I reminded you about dinner Sunday. I laughed. The weekly dinners at Margaret's apartment had become a cherished tradition. Her small one-bedroom place was always spotless, usually filled with the smell of something homemade and decorated with photos of David and her late husband, alongside newer pictures of her library colleagues and George. "How are she and George doing?" I asked. "Really well. They're talking about moving in together," which terrifies and excites her in equal measure. Margaret's relationship with George had blossomed slowly. Both were cautious about loving again, but their shared experience of loss and their commitment to emotional honesty had created a solid foundation. George was kind, patient, and brought out Margaret's best qualities, while gently challenging her remaining tendencies toward self-pity. The next morning, I received a call that would have devastated me 2 years ago, but now felt like a natural transition. Robert and Susan wanted to sell David's childhood home and asked if I wanted any of his remaining belongings. "We're moving to a retirement community," Susan explained. "We'd like you to have first choice of anything you'd like to keep." I spent Saturday afternoon in David's childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes of his high school yearbooks, college textbooks, and early career mementos. As I sorted through his things, I felt gratitude rather than grief. These objects told the story of a life well lived, dreams pursued, and love shared. In the bottom of his college desk, I found something unexpected, a letter addressed to me, dated just 1 month before his death. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read. "Dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, something has happened to me unexpectedly. I know this will be one of the hardest things you'll ever face, but I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. I've been thinking lately about legacy and what really matters. It's not the house we bought or the money we saved. It's the love we shared, the kindness we showed others, and the positive impact we made on the world around us. I know my mother will struggle after I'm gone. Please be patient with her if you can. Her fear and loneliness sometimes make her act in ways that don't reflect her true heart. But you, my love, you have the strength and wisdom to handle whatever comes. Most importantly, please don't let grief define the rest of your life. Find new purposes, new relationships, new sources of joy. Honor our marriage by living fully, not by staying frozen in the past. You are the strongest, most compassionate person I know. Whatever challenges you face, I have complete faith in your ability to not just survive, but to thrive. All my love, forever and always. David. P.S. Check the safety deposit box. There are some things there that might be helpful if you ever need them. Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. Even in death, he was still taking care of me, still believing in my strength when I couldn't see it myself. That evening, I called Margaret and read David's letter over the phone. "He knew," she said softly when I finished. "Somehow he knew I would struggle and that you would need to protect yourself, but he also believed we could both become better people. Are you angry that he saw your potential problems?" "No," Margaret replied without hesitation. "I'm grateful he saw my potential for growth, and I'm grateful you chose to nurture that potential instead of simply punishing my mistakes." Sunday dinner at Margaret's was particularly meaningful. George was there along with Michael and Jennifer, who had driven in from the suburbs. The conversation flowed easily, touching on work, travel plans, and family memories. Margaret shared stories about her latest library patrons, George talked about his volunteer work, and I described my newest design project. "You know what I love about these dinners?" Jennifer said as we cleared the dishes. "This feels like a real family. Not perfect, but honest and supportive." "It took some work to get here," Margaret said, meeting my eyes across the table. "But sometimes the relationships you have to fight for are the strongest ones." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the unexpected gift of the past 2 years. David's death had broken me open in ways I never anticipated. Margaret's betrayal had forced me to discover strength I didn't know I possessed. But from that brokenness had emerged a deeper understanding of love, forgiveness, and the complex ways people heal and grow. I thought about the clients I was helping to redesign their homes and their lives, the students I was teaching about the connection between environment and emotional well-being, the relationship with Jonathan that was teaching me new ways to love, the transformed relationship with Margaret that proved people could change if they were willing to do the hard work. David was right about legacy. It wasn't about money or possessions. It was about the love you shared, the kindness you showed others, and the positive impact you made on the world around you. If you've ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members, or if you've faced betrayal during your darkest moments, I hope my story shows you that healing is possible, not just surviving the pain, but transforming it into wisdom and strength that can help others. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need our compassion the most. And sometimes choosing forgiveness over revenge creates changes that honor our loved ones' memories better than any punishment ever could. Take care of yourselves, protect your boundaries, but don't let pain close your hearts to the possibility of growth and redemption. Love endures, even when the person is gone, and it continues to guide us toward becoming the people they always believed we could be. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like and subscribe and share your own experiences with forgiveness and family boundaries in the comments below. Remember, healing isn't linear, but it's always possible.